Viewer notice. The narrative below is entirely fictional and intended for entertainment only. Its people, businesses, financial entities, conversations, and circumstances do not portray actual persons, companies, or real-life cases. Story: Millionaire husband secretly had dinner with his mistress. Then a waiter served him his pregnant wife's divorce papers. Hello everyone. Keep listening, because the most expensive thing at Nate Callahan's secret dinner was not the champagne, the private room, or the dress his mistress wore. It was the sentence his pregnant wife had already found in a financial record. If you enjoy stories where patience matters more than shouting, subscribe and stay with Evie until the last number is accounted for. 6 hours before a waiter served Nate his divorce papers, a second phone fell onto a nursery floor. Part 1. Paid in full. Mr. Callahan, your wife already paid for dinner. Nate Callahan's champagne glass stopped halfway to his lips. Across from him, Brooke Sinclair smiled uncertainly beneath the amber chandeliers of Bellamy, one of Manhattan's most discreet restaurants. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city glittered 40 stories below. Inside their private dining room, everything had been arranged for secrecy. No photographers, no familiar investors, no inconvenient questions. At least, that was what Nate believed. "Excuse me," he asked. Daniel Brooks, the head waiter, stood beside their table holding a black leather folder. He was 46, composed, almost expressionless. "Mrs. Callahan asked us to take care of the check in advance, sir." Brooks' smile vanished. Nate slowly lowered his glass. "My wife." "Yes, sir." A piano played somewhere beyond the velvet partition. Soft, cold, unhurried. Nate glanced toward the entrance. Evie was supposed to be home, 7 months pregnant, resting in the nursery, believing her husband was having dinner with an investor. "How does Evelyn know I'm here?" Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he placed the folder between the 2 champagne glasses. The leather touched the white linen with a quiet thump. Nate stared at it. "What is this?" Daniel stepped back. "Something Mrs. Callahan requested you receive before the check." Nate opened the folder. The first words hit harder than any accusation could have. "Summons with notice. Action for divorce." His face emptied. Brooke leaned forward. "Nate." He turned the page. Then another. His breathing changed. "No." Brooke reached toward him. "What happened?" Nate pulled the papers away from her. "Nothing. But something had happened. Something enormous." Because for 10 years, Nate Callahan had believed he understood his wife. Evie forgave forgotten anniversaries. She tolerated late meetings. She defended him when friends whispered that success had changed him. She had even smiled through months of pregnancy while he became increasingly absent. Nate had mistaken all of that patience for permanence. Now divorce papers were sitting beside a bottle of champagne he had ordered for another woman. "You said she would never leave," Brooke whispered. Nate looked at her sharply. "Not now." Then he noticed something beneath the petition. A restaurant receipt. "Dinner for 2, paid in full. Evelyn Callahan." Below it was a handwritten sentence. "For the last thing I will ever pay for without being asked." Nate stared at the handwriting. He knew it instantly. The same handwriting that had filled birthday cards, grocery lists, and notes tucked into his briefcase when Callahan Properties was still operating from a rented office with broken air conditioning. For the first time that night, his confidence cracked. He grabbed his phone and called Evie. Ring. Brooke watched him. Ring. Nate looked toward the door. Then a third ring sounded, not from his phone, but from the hallway outside the private room. His entire body went still. A shadow appeared beyond the doorway. Honey blonde hair. A pale blue maternity dress. One hand resting protectively beneath a 7-month belly. Evelyn Callahan stepped into view. She was beautiful, but there was no satisfaction on her face. No smile. No tears. Just a stillness Nate had never seen before. He stood so quickly his chair scraped across the marble. "Evie." She declined his call without looking at the screen. Nate swallowed. "What are you doing here?" Evie looked at Brooke, then at the champagne, then finally at her husband. "Ending something you thought I'd never find out about." Nate opened his mouth. Evie raised one hand. "Not tonight." Then she turned away. What Nate didn't know was that the affair was no longer the most dangerous secret in their marriage. 6 hours earlier, a second phone had fallen from his coat pocket onto the nursery floor, and one message on that screen had shown Evie that her husband wasn't merely planning a life with another woman. He was planning a life in which his pregnant wife walked away with almost nothing. Part 2. The second phone. 6 hours earlier, Evelyn Callahan still had one reason to believe her husband might be innocent. It disappeared when a second phone hit the nursery floor. The sound was small, plastic against hardwood. Click. Evie looked down from the rocking chair where she had been folding tiny cotton blankets. Nate stood near the doorway, fastening his watch beneath the cuff of a charcoal suit. "I'll probably be late," he said. "Dinner with the Halston investors." Evie picked up a tiny pair of socks. "How late?" 10. Maybe 11. He crossed the nursery and kissed her forehead. For half a second, he looked like the man she had married. Then his own phone buzzed in his hand. Nate glanced at it and immediately turned the screen away. "Get some rest, okay?" His palm touched her 7-month belly. Their son moved beneath it. Nate smiled. "Take care of mom for me, buddy." Evie almost hated how convincing he sounded. Then he left. The penthouse door closed. Silence returned. Evie stood slowly and reached for the jacket Nate had forgotten across the back of a chair. She intended to call after him. Instead, something slipped from the inside pocket. A phone. Not the one Nate carried everywhere. This one was smaller. Black case. No wallpaper. No notifications except one glowing message. Evie stared at it. "Brooke, same table tonight? I wore the dress you like." Her fingers went cold. For several seconds, she did nothing. There are moments when the mind protects the heart by refusing to understand what the eyes have already seen. Evie read the message again. "Same table. Tonight. The dress you like." The phone wasn't locked. She touched the screen. 6 months of messages opened beneath her thumb. Brooke Sinclair, Nate's communications director. The woman who had hugged Evie at the company Christmas party and asked when the baby was due. Evie scrolled. Hotel confirmations. Photographs from Miami. Dinner reservations. Messages sent while Nate supposedly worked late. She kept going. Every swipe removed another excuse. "Wish you were here." She suspects nothing. After the baby, things change. Evie's breathing became shallow. Her son kicked sharply. She lowered herself into the rocking chair. "It's okay," she whispered, though she wasn't sure whether she meant him or herself. Then she found the message that changed everything. It had been sent 3 weeks earlier. Brooke had asked when Nate planned to tell Evie. His reply sat beneath it. "Once the baby arrives, leaving her will be easier. By then, everything important will already be moved." Evie stopped. Moved? She read it again. Not settled. Not handled. Moved. A second message followed. "She won't understand the financial side until it's too late." The pain inside Evie changed shape. Until that moment, she had been a pregnant wife discovering an affair. Now she was something else. A woman being prepared for. She photographed the conversation with her own phone. Every message. Every date. Every image. Then she placed Nate's second phone exactly where it had fallen. At 6:14 p.m., her personal phone rang. "Nate." Evie answered. "Hey." His voice was relaxed. "I left my gray jacket there. Can you check the pocket? I think I left something." Evie looked at the black phone on the nursery floor. Her heartbeat became strangely calm. "There's nothing here." Silence. Only half a second. But she heard it. "Okay," Nate said. "Must be in the car." "Probably. Love you." Evie looked at the crib they had chosen together. "Have a good dinner, Nate." She ended the call before he could answer. Then she opened the joint investment portal and household financial archive she and Nate still used for statements and tax records. If he was moving something important, she wanted to know exactly what was leaving accounts she was entitled to see. And before midnight, Evie would discover that Brooke Sinclair was only half the betrayal. Part 3. Numbers Nate forgot. Before Nate Callahan owned glass towers, private cars, and a corner office overlooking Manhattan, he owned one folding desk and a printer that jammed every third page. Evie remembered those years better than he did. 10 years earlier, Callahan Properties operated from a cramped second-floor office above a dry cleaner in Queens. The air conditioning barely worked. The carpet smelled like dust. Nate had ambition, 2 commercial listings, and almost no money. Evie had a bookkeeping job during the day and spent her evenings helping him survive. She organized tenant records, corrected invoices, built spreadsheets, proofread proposals while eating takeout beside him at midnight. When Nate couldn't afford an accountant, Evie became one without the title. "Someday," he told her one night, staring at a skyline he couldn't yet afford to enter, "I'm going to give you everything." Evie smiled. "Just remember who fixed your spreadsheets." Nate laughed and kissed her. "None of this happens without you." She believed him. And for a while, he believed himself. The first major property deal changed everything. Then came another. Investors learned Nate Callahan's name. Callahan Properties moved from Queens to Manhattan. The folding desk disappeared. So did the broken printer. Eventually, people began calling Nate a self-made millionaire. Evie never corrected them. But Nate did something worse. He started agreeing. In a business magazine interview 3 years earlier, a reporter asked how he'd built the company. Nate leaned back beneath studio lights and said, "I built Callahan Properties entirely from the ground up." Evie had been standing 10 feet away, outside the camera frame. She remembered the strange little ache those words caused. Not anger, erasure. Nate hadn't lied about the buildings. He had lied about who stood beside him while they were being built. Now, 7 months pregnant, Evie sat in the nursery with Nate's secret messages photographed on her phone and opened the joint investment portal she and Nate had used for years. She did not guess a password, break into a company system, or search accounts that were not hers. The statements were available under her own authorized login because the investment account was jointly held and used for family assets. She opened the latest statement, then the prior month, then the month before that. Her pulse accelerated. She wasn't looking for proof that Nate was sleeping with another woman anymore. The second phone had already answered that. She was looking for the meaning behind one sentence. Everything important will already be moved. Evie opened the latest monthly statement. Restaurant charges appeared first. Bellamy. Hotels. Transportation. Jewelry. Familiar betrayals wearing dollar signs. Then she noticed something stranger. A transfer she didn't recognize. $85,000. Evie leaned closer. The money had left an investment account connected to assets accumulated during their marriage. Destination, Merit Holdings, LLC. She had never heard that name. Evie searched previous months. Another transfer. Smaller. Then another. A pattern. Her stomach tightened. She immediately called the attorney her sister had once recommended. "I need someone to look at financial records," Evie said when the woman answered. "I think my husband is having an affair." A pause. "And I think he's moving money." Evie looked around the nursery. The crib, the ultrasound photograph, the tiny clothes waiting for a child whose father was currently planning dinner with another woman. For the first time that evening, betrayal wasn't the thing frightening her most. Because Nate hadn't simply been preparing to leave his wife. He had been preparing the ground before she knew there was a war. Part 4, Merit Holdings. The affair hurt Evie. The $85,000 frightened her. By 6:47 p.m., Evelyn Callahan was sitting at the nursery desk with her laptop open, one hand resting beneath her belly, while an attorney named Rachel Morgan studied the financial records Evie had forwarded. "I need you to understand something," Rachel said through the phone. "Dinner receipts are one problem. Moving substantial marital assets without disclosure may be another." Evie stared at the transfer. $85,000. Merit Holdings, LLC. "Can you find out what that company is?" "Yes. But don't contact your husband yet." Evie almost laughed. Nate had spent 10 years believing she couldn't keep anything from him. Tonight, silence was the only thing protecting her. Rachel called back 23 minutes later. Merit Holdings was formed 4 months ago. By Nate. Not directly. But the registered paperwork connects back to an attorney his company has used. Evie's fingers tightened around the phone. "What does that mean?" "It means we keep looking." So they did. Another transfer appeared 3 months earlier. $40,000. Then $25,000. Not enough to destroy Callahan Properties. Enough to create a pattern. Evie pulled up the joint investment account she and Nate had funded throughout their marriage. She remembered signing the original paperwork at their kitchen table years ago. Back then, Nate had joked that someday the balance would contain more zeros than they could count. Now money was leaving it without a conversation. Could this be legitimate? Evie asked. "Possibly," Rachel replied. "That's why we document before we accuse." That sentence steadied her. Evie didn't want a fantasy. She wanted facts. She searched the old accounting inbox again. Corporate dinners. Hotel charges. Jewelry. Then Bellamy. Nate had used the same restaurant repeatedly over 6 months. Often 2 guests. Always evenings he told Evie he was meeting investors. Her phone buzzed. A message from Nate. "Meeting is running late. Don't wait for me. Love you." Evie looked at the words until they blurred. Then another archived email caught her attention. A reservation confirmation for Bellamy that evening. Private dining room. 2 guests. Nate Callahan. Brooke Sinclair. Evie closed her eyes. The baby moved beneath her palm. Your dad thinks I'm still waiting, she whispered. Rachel remained quiet on the line. Finally, she asked, what do you want to do tonight? Evie looked around the nursery. A framed ultrasound sat beside the lamp. Tiny shoes waited beneath the crib. For months, she had imagined Nate standing in this room holding their son. Now she could see the truth more clearly. Nate wasn't simply cheating while his wife was pregnant. He was planning his exit while expecting Evie to remain financially blind. Can we file? Evie asked. We can begin immediately. Then begin. Do you want to confront him first? Evie looked at Nate's second phone lying beside the laptop. 6 months of lies inside a black case. No, her answer surprised even her. I don't want another explanation. Rachel paused. What do you want? Evie opened Bellamy's reservation confirmation. She studied the time. The private room. The table Nate always requested because he believed discretion could be purchased. Then something inside her became perfectly still. I want him served. Rachel arranged for the filed divorce papers to be personally delivered at Bellamy. Daniel Brooks, the head waiter, was an adult New York resident and not a party to the case. He agreed to make the delivery and complete the proof of service afterward. Evie then called Bellamy, confirmed Nate's table herself, and gave the manager her credit card to pay for the entire dinner in advance. Would you like us to include a note on the receipt? The manager asked. Evie looked toward the crib. Yes. She spoke slowly. Write this exactly. Her voice didn't shake. For the last thing I will ever pay for without being asked. When the call ended, Evie removed her wedding ring and placed it beside the ultrasound photograph. Nate thought he was going to Bellamy to celebrate a future without his wife. He had no idea his wife had just arranged the final course. Part 5, Before the Check. To New Beginnings. Nate Callahan smiled as his champagne glass touched Brooks. Click. 5 seconds later, Daniel Brooks stopped beside the table carrying the black folder that would end Nate's marriage. Mr. Callahan? Nate looked up, irritation flashing across his face. Yes. Daniel placed the folder between the champagne glasses. Your wife asked me to make sure you received this before the check. Nate's smile disappeared. Brooks slowly lowered her glass. Your wife. Nate opened the folder. Summons with notice. Action for divorce. Silence. The piano continued beyond the velvet partition, each note suddenly too clear. Nate turned the first page. Then the second. His jaw tightened. No, Brooke leaned toward him. Nate, what is this? He ignored her. Beneath the petition sat the prepaid receipt. Dinner for 2, paid in full. Evelyn Callahan. And underneath, for the last thing I will ever pay for without being asked. Nate stared at Evie's handwriting. You said she would never leave, Brooke whispered. His head snapped toward her. Not now. He grabbed his phone and called Evie. Ring. Ring. Then another phone began ringing outside the room. Nate froze. Evie stepped through the doorway. Pale blue maternity dress. Honey blonde hair resting over her shoulders. One hand beneath her 7-month belly. No wedding ring. Nate stood so quickly his chair scraped across the marble. Evie. She declined the call. Listen to me. Evie looked at the champagne glasses. I listened for 10 years. Brooks' face tightened. He told me your marriage was already over. Evie turned toward her. There was no hatred in her expression. Then he lied to both of us. Evie, please. Nate moved closer. She reached into her handbag and placed the black second phone on the table. Nate stopped. Color drained from his face. Brooke stared at it. What is that? 6 months, Evie said quietly. 6 months of messages. Nate lowered his voice. We can discuss this at home. No, this doesn't need to become public. Evie almost smiled at the word. Public. Even now, Nate feared embarrassment more than betrayal. She opened the folder again and removed another document. $85,000. Merit Holdings, LLC. Nate's eyes changed. Not guilt. Fear. Where did you get that? Evie watched him carefully. Interesting. What? You didn't ask where I got Brooke's messages. Brooke looked between them. Evie placed 2 more transfer records beside the first. 40,000. 25,000. Then 85. Those are business matters. From an account connected to assets we built during our marriage. Nate's voice hardened. You don't understand the structure. Maybe not. Evie rested her hand over her son. That's why my attorney does. Brooke turned toward Nate. You told me everything was already separated. Nate said nothing. You said she'd walk away with almost nothing. The sentence hung over the table. Evie felt it, but it no longer cut the way Nate expected. She had already read worse. Nate stepped toward her. Evie, whatever you think is happening, filing papers like this could hurt the company. Employees, investors, everything we built. There it was. The empire placed between them like a shield. Evie met his eyes. Then you should have thought about them before moving money you knew wasn't yours alone. Nate stared at the woman he had expected to remain financially blind. For the first time that night, he understood the affair was not the secret that frightened her anymore. And for the first time in their marriage, Evelyn Callahan was no longer asking her husband for the truth. She had brought it to the table herself. Part 6. The Woman Who Knew the Books. Brooke Sinclair was the first person to break the silence. You said she'd walk away with almost nothing. Nate's eyes snapped toward her. Brooke, stop. No, her voice was quieter now. The confidence she had carried into Bellamy was disappearing one piece at a time. You told me the finances were already handled. Evie stood across the table, one hand resting beneath her belly. She watched Nate search for the version of himself that could still control the room. Husband, CEO, millionaire, negotiator. None of them seemed to know what to say next. This is between Evie and me, he finally said. Brooke gave a short, bitter laugh. You made it between all three of us. Nate turned back to Evie. You have no idea what those transfers are for. Then explaining them should be easy. They're part of a legitimate restructuring. Good. Evie nodded toward the documents. You can explain that to the attorneys. Nate's jaw tightened. Do you understand what you're doing? There was the old voice again. Low. Controlled. Designed to make the other person question herself. Evie had heard it during arguments about missed dinners, unexplained charges, and nights when Nate arrived home smelling like a hotel lobby. For years, she had softened whenever he hardened. Not tonight. Yes, she said. I'm leaving my husband. Nate flinched. While you're pregnant? Being pregnant is exactly why I'm done pretending this is normal. His eyes dropped toward her belly. For 1 second, something almost human crossed his face. Fear, perhaps. Or shame. Our son deserves a family. Evie's expression changed. He has one. You know what I mean. I do. She stepped closer. And that's the problem. Brooke slowly reached for her purse. Nate noticed. Where are you going? Home. Sit down. Brooke stared at him. Don't talk to me like that. Nate lowered his voice. We'll deal with this later. Later. She looked at the second phone, then at the transfer records. Was there a later for me too? Nate said nothing. Brooke's eyes narrowed. You told me Evie didn't understand the business. You said once the baby arrived, she'd accept whatever you offered. Evie felt the words land, but they no longer surprised her. Nate looked furious. Brooke, was that your plan? Brooke continued. Move the money, divorce her, then tell me some story about why everything had to stay in your name. Enough. That single word answered more than Nate intended. Brooke stood. She looked at Evie. For the first time, there was no competition in her face. Only embarrassment. I'm sorry, she said quietly. Evie didn't absolve her. She didn't attack her either. You knew he was married. Brooke lowered her eyes. I did. Then she walked away. Nate watched her disappear beyond the velvet partition. His perfect dinner was now 2 untouched glasses and a stack of documents. He turned toward Evie. So this is what you wanted? Humiliate me. No, take the company. No, then what? Evie looked at him for a long moment. 10 years. 1 marriage. 1 unborn child. Thousands of hours helping build a life Nate eventually began describing as his alone. I want what I'm legally entitled to, she said. I want complete financial transparency. I want our son protected. And I want out. Nate stared at her. You're willing to destroy everything over an affair? Evie shook her head. You still think this is about Brooke? She placed the $85,000 transfer in front of him. The affair ended my trust. This showed me what you planned to do with that trust after you broke it. Nate's face went still. Evie picked up her handbag. I don't want your empire, Nate. She turned toward the door, then stopped. I want my name off the list of things you think you own. Behind her, no one spoke. Only the piano remained. And for the first time since Callahan properties became worth millions, Nate Callahan sat at a table where money could not buy back the person walking away. Part 7. Disclosure. The first thing Nate Callahan did after Evie walked out of Bellamy was reach for his phone. Not Brooke. Not his attorney. His chief financial officer. I need you to check something, he said. Across the table, Two champagne glasses remained untouched beneath the chandelier. The black second phone sat beside the divorce papers like evidence at a trial. "What exactly am I checking?" his CFO asked. Nate looked at the transfer records Evie had left behind. $25,000. $40,000. $85,000. Merit Holdings. Silence. "Nate, what happened?" "Just check it." He ended the call. For years, money had solved almost every uncomfortable problem in Nate's life. A difficult tenant could be bought out. A bad deal could be restructured. An angry investor could be reassured. Even time could be purchased through assistants, drivers, private rooms, and people paid to make inconvenience disappear. But there was no invoice for restoring trust. 3 days later, Nate sat inside a conference room at Callahan Properties while two attorneys explained what Evie had already understood. The transfers would be examined. Accounts connected to the marriage would require disclosure. If the money had been moved improperly, it would have to be addressed through the divorce process. Nate leaned back in his chair. "She's trying to take my company." His attorney shook his head. "Her filing doesn't say that." "Then what does she want?" "Transparency." The word irritated him more than accusation would have. Meanwhile, Evie sat across town in Rachel Morgan's office wearing the same calm expression she had carried into Bellamy. Rachel slid a document toward her. "We need to define your priorities." Evie looked down. "Property. Support. Custody. Financial disclosure." 10 years of marriage reduced to categories printed in black ink. "My son comes first. Of course. I want a fair division of what I'm legally entitled to. I want every transfer accounted for. And I don't want his business destroyed just to punish him." Rachel studied her. "You're sure?" Evie nodded. "People work there. They have families. Nate's choices are his. They shouldn't become everyone else's punishment." That was the part Nate had never expected. Evie had enough evidence to make noise. She chose accuracy instead. Enough anger to seek humiliation. She chose boundaries. Weeks passed. The financial review uncovered personal expenses Nate could no longer casually dismiss. Private dinners, travel connected to Brooke, and transfers that required explanation and correction. The consequences were serious, but not cinematic fantasy. No police raid. No billion-dollar collapse overnight. Just lawyers, accountants, uncomfortable meetings, and numbers refusing to forget where they had been. Brooke resigned from Callahan Properties. She never returned Nate's calls. One evening, Nate appeared outside Evie's temporary apartment after texting first. She met him in the lobby. He looked older. Not ruined. Not poor. Just stripped of certainty. "I can fix the money," he said. Evie said nothing. "I can put everything back." "You should." "And then?" Nate asked. "Then what?" His voice cracked slightly. "Does that change anything between us?" Evie looked at him. This was the man who once promised none of his success would happen without her. The man who later planned for her to understand the truth only when it was too late. "No," Nate lowered his eyes. "So, I lose my family anyway." Evie's hand moved over her belly. "You don't lose your son because I stop being your wife. What kind of father you become from here is still your decision." Nate looked up. For once, he had no argument ready. Evie stepped toward the elevator. "I never wanted your empire." The doors opened behind her. "I wanted a marriage where I didn't need an accountant to discover whether my husband was telling me the truth." She entered. Nate remained in the lobby as the doors began closing. Evie watched him through the narrowing gap. She felt no victory, only relief. Because justice, she was learning, did not always sound like applause. Sometimes it sounded like elevator doors sliding shut while the person who once controlled your future remained on the other side. Part 8. The Receipt. 6 months later, Evelyn Callahan found the receipt at the bottom of a cardboard box. She had been looking for a stapler. Instead, she found the last dinner of her marriage. Bellamy, dinner for two, paid in full. Evelyn Callahan. Evie stood perfectly still in the middle of her new office while afternoon sunlight stretched across the hardwood floor. Behind her, a small brass sign on the wall read Callahan Financial Consulting. It wasn't a skyscraper. There were no marble elevators or private drivers waiting downstairs. Just 3 desks, 2 employees, several filing cabinets, and a coffee machine that made terrible coffee. Evie loved every inch of it. A soft cry came from the bassinet beside her desk. She turned immediately. "Hey, sweetheart." Her son, Oliver, blinked up at her with sleepy blue eyes. Healthy. Safe. Almost 4 months old. Evie lifted him against her shoulder and kissed the top of his head. The divorce wasn't finished overnight. Real endings rarely were. There had been meetings, disclosures, signatures, and difficult conversations about parenting. The disputed transfers were accounted for and corrected through the legal process. Nate remained wealthy. Callahan Properties remained standing. Hundreds of employees still went to work every morning. Evie had never wanted their lives burned down because her marriage had failed. She wanted fairness. She got it. More importantly, she got something no settlement could place a dollar value on: choice. After Oliver was born, Evie returned to the work she had once quietly performed behind Nate's success. Bookkeeping became financial consulting. Her first clients came through friends, then referrals. Several were women rebuilding their finances after divorce, separation, or years of letting someone else handle every account. Evie never told them what decisions to make. She simply made sure they could see the numbers before someone else used those numbers against them. Nate visited Oliver regularly under the parenting arrangement they had agreed upon. The first time he held his son, he cried. Evie watched from across the room. She didn't forgive him because he cried. She didn't punish him because he did. She simply let the moment belong to father and son. Nate had lost his marriage. He had not been given permission to abandon fatherhood. One evening, after handing Oliver back to her, Nate noticed the office sign. "You kept Callahan." Evie looked at the name. "It's my name too." Nate nodded slowly. Months earlier, he might have argued. Now he only said, "You're good at this." Evie smiled faintly. "I always was." He understood. No explanation was necessary. After he left, Evie returned to the cardboard box. The Bellamy receipt was still lying on top. She read her handwritten sentence again. "For the last thing I will ever pay for without being asked." She remembered the champagne, Brooke's emerald dress, Daniel's black folder. Nate's face when he realized his pregnant wife knew more than he imagined. But the memory no longer felt like an open wound. It felt like a door she had already walked through. Evie folded the receipt once, then tore it in half. Rip. Such a small sound for the end of something that had once occupied her entire life. Oliver began crying in the next room. Evie dropped the pieces into the trash and followed his voice. She did not look back. 10 years earlier, Nate Callahan had promised to give Evie everything when he became successful. In the end, she discovered she had never needed everything. She needed the freedom to understand the numbers, make informed choices, and raise Oliver without teaching him that control was the same as security. Nate still had the chance to become a dependable father. Evie had the chance to become fully herself again. Their marriage ended, but responsibility did not have to end with it.